we ended up having to really rethink what we were doing. So even though I felt better and I was starting to build, our API, starting to use React, starting to actually get those technical chops and feeling good about technically the product, and how the stack, we were feeling less great about the actual business and the problem we're trying to solve. Um, so that imposter system came back again in force, and
Hello and welcome to Educative Sessions. My name is Lee Ngo. Educative Sessions is a podcast series with people in the developer world about their coding experiences. And Educative makes it easy for authors to provide interactive and adaptive courses for software developers. Today, my guest is Carter Lathrop. Is that correct? Yes.
Lathrop, yep.
Lathrop, excuse me, who is the co-founder and CTO of PaperStreet. And we're going to talk today about taking the leap and becoming a technical co-founder, and especially the challenges and roadblocks that happened along the way. Carter, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Awesome. So, we'd like you to talk a little bit about yourself, and certainly let's start with the beginnings of like your challenges when you started your career as a developer and how that led into perhaps some of the successes early on that you experienced.
For sure. Yeah. Today, seasoned developer at this point with 10 years of programming, 8 of which doing it professionally, but definitely didn't start out that way. And kind of what I hope to talk about and kind of normalize here, the conversation around imposter syndrome. It happens a lot. I think it happens to everyone.
For sure. Yeah.
And it's something near and dear to my heart, and I love talking about it with people. I see it happen especially a lot in the startup world. People moving from comfy job into something way more uncertain is both exciting and scary. So yeah. So how it all started for me actually, my first job as an engineer, a junior developer in San Francisco. I was working at an agency for Levi's doing e-commerce development. I actually learned way too much about jeans and jeans fit, especially for women, way more than I thought I'd ever learn. I got my chops doing some enterprise Java, some janky, outdated Ajax, jQuery front end, but it was definitely a job. It's nice to be working, making money as a professional engineer. But a year or so into that position, we actually lost Levi's as a client, and that caused the San Francisco office to shut down. So that was really my first big blow to the heart. It felt like going from stable position to kind of being left out to dry. And unbeknownst to me, that time before I got a new job was, I expected it to be a couple weeks turned into a month turned into 2 months, where I was unemployed, getting turned down a lot from.
And you're living in San Francisco at the time,
San Francisco,
which is not an easy city to like. If you don't have a job, you really counted your days, right? Yeah.
Expensive apartment, brutal time, like lying awake at night. I'm sure people can relate to this. Just staring at the ceiling, feeling dread and anxiety. So I remember that very, very clearly, and having that challenge, that feeling of like I don't belong. I'm never gonna be an engineer. Not worth it. Like not worth my my salt here. That kind of feeling, I think maybe it happens once to most people, but it really does happen. I think if you are going to take risks and are going to grow as a person, that's like a normal experience everyone feels. And even beyond that, when I did finally get a job as an engineer, became technical lead working at Salesforce, that feeling actually came back again when I did decide to take that leap. Kind of what we're talking about here. When I did feel confident enough in myself after like growing as an engineer, running multiple teams at Salesforce. I was doing some business development, prototype work, gaining new business, like multi-million-dollar contracts. I felt like the top of my game as an engineer, and those feelings of imposter syndrome, I didn't think I'd ever feel again. did come back to me, and they came back, and like that leap I took in meeting my co-founder and saying like, oh, I know everything there is to know about engineering, about programming, and then to start from scratch in the beginning in a new product. Those feelings very much came back.
I find this really interesting because a lot of the times I hear a narrative about people starting a company, it's usually this like crazy, insane, but certainly fueled with courage to jump from a space of comfort to a space of uncertainty. But what you're expressing is that in that move, you were actually very concerned. I mean, you had
Yeah,
imposter syndrome at your ability to go into a company, despite the fact that you were, let's just summarize as you were crushing it at Salesforce. Like,
right.
what can account for that? Like this, I guess, in my view, or my perspective, a departure in perspective.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think people get very comfortable in like the day to day and the technology they're working in, the stack. Like, especially in a big organization, you own such a tiny part of the technology. Even though I felt super comfortable where I was at, and maybe I was like overconfident in my abilities. Once you're at some place for a very long time, taking a step into doing something completely new and like starting from completely from scratch, picking like your entire stack. I went from like a complete Java, like Java backend to kind of vanilla JS front end, and then realizing making a decision going to my own company. It's like, I don't want to do Java. I want to do JavaScript like through and through. And like making those decisions was tough because I knew that was the best thing for the direction of the company, because I could hire a full stack engineer that just knew JavaScript. They can work on the front and back end, and that paid off in dividends. But at the time, I didn't know JavaScript that well. I didn't know Node that well. I didn't even know React. I knew some vanilla. So the first initial iteration of the product was kind of a janky Node Express backend. Mm-hmm. Barely had an API, and the front end was like, vanilla JS and server side rendered like HTML using like handlebars, and like that was crazy outdated tech in like 2018. But I had to do it because that's what I knew, and that's what I could push forward. And that whole time I was like doubting myself. Like all these other engineers around me starting companies have these like amazing RESTful APIs, and like they're using the bleeding edge React, and that wasn't me. So how do I juggle, like, yes, it's exciting to go off and do a new company, but as like a technical co-founder, you're not always going to have the tools right away and like the knowledge and the experience to do things that you want to do. So that courage, I think, maybe that's people like posturing, like they're trying to come off as like they know everything, but in reality, they're kind of taking these educated, like doing the best they can and making decisions and like slowly incrementally improving the stack. Right. So you start off kind of knowing nothing, and then slowly move your way into kind of knowing something.
Right. I mean, I've when I was an entrepreneur, I've always hated this advice, but there's some fruitfulness to adopting it, which is the whole fake it till you make it kind of thing. Yeah. And it's more often associated with respect to any CEOs are watching. It's more associated with them and them doing whatever it possibly takes to get to that next level. But it's interesting. I mean, it's almost as if you're encountering a similar kind of thing amongst the technical side of people, because it's of my experience that any technical co-founder or CTO who claims that they are like figuring it out from the get-go and have it all built and they're just super cutting edge and optimized, they are completely fronting. Like they are working like they're just kind of duct taping things together, right? Just to make it work. So as you proceed in your own experiences as an entrepreneur, when did you get to the point where things started to settle a little bit? Was it through the technology, or is it through the other facets of being a founder of a company?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So after we started the company in 2018, we got into Techstars in early 2019. Techstars is an company business accelerator. When I spent most of 2018 just kind of like getting my technical kind of bearing on the company, and then similar kind of to what happened with me losing my job, we actually decided we needed to pivot. The market we were targeting ended up not being as big or as like fruitful as we kind of originally thought. And without going into too many details, we kind of pivoted into what the company is today, and that was tough yet again. So I think we ended up having to really rethink what we were doing. So even though I felt better and I was starting to build, our API, starting to use React, starting to actually get those technical chops and feeling good about technically the product, and how the stack, we were feeling less great about the actual business and the problem we're trying to solve. So that imposter system came back again in force, and we were flailing around trying to figure out like who's our customer, like how much can we actually charge for this, how are we going to stay alive, and the low at that point, I think we starting from scratch. Even though it was new technology, I kind of knew what I was doing, new product, new direction. Ended up like not taking a salary for a bit, being homeless in New York when I was living in New York. So I was jumping between friends' couches, my girlfriend's place, my parents' home in Connecticut, while also trying to manage like 3 or 4 employees in New York. And that, figuring out again was, another imposter syndrome moment to overcome. So trying to share that like it's not all rainbows and butterflies, like you're going to hit challenges, but that's part of the growing process. And coming outside of that was just like perseverance. Was even though investors, even though customers even were telling us like no one's going to use this, no one's going to pay for it, it's just like perseverance and like believing in yourself. And I believe having a co-founder there who's like endlessly optimistic, almost like to a crazy extent. He just thinks like it's always going to work out. It's always going to work out. Like
Yeah,
I don't
understand that, but
I don't
wish
understand
sometimes
it.
I had
But
that.
without him feeling that way, I don't think like we'd be here as a company, because we've been like turned down so many times, like been told no so many times. And so major credit to him to actually getting us to where we are. And it's kind of just like a slow burn, right? And after a while, things will start to catch on. In our case, sometimes they don't. But I think we set the groundwork technically, so I feel good about like where the product and the stack is today. Trust the fundamentals, right? Know your customer, solve their problems, and that's kind of like where we're at today.
That's awesome. And thanks so much for sharing. I mean, that's a crazy story of like, you've got people who are technically advanced, who have worked in fantastic companies, and then encountering homelessness and like, currying favors from people you're really not comfortable doing so. That's wild. And so my final question, I think we covered a lot of the bases, but is the core theme of imposter syndrome. But as you're talking to me, I'm like redefining imposter syndrome as not something that's specific to any particular discipline or field or aspect of your journey. How do you look at it in retrospect? And then how would you advise, given all the challenges you've gone through, for people to manage and if not overcome this syndrome?
So I think the first question is like, what's my take on it, and kind of deal.
We'll start there. So how do you view it in retrospect?
How do I view it in retrospect? I think I used to think of it as like, for whatever reason, it's like super prevalent in the engineering world. Like it gets talked a lot about just for developers. And I don't know. I mean, I only have my take on it, so I can't speak for any other industry or any other position. But I have to believe, like, especially going through it as like an entrepreneur, that everyone must feel this way in like anything that they do. And so I don't know, I almost feel like it's getting worse. I think kind of similar to how like social media is making people feel depressed because they're not good enough, like materialistically, superficially. I think the same thing kind of happens maybe on Twitter and LinkedIn, where people see everyone like having this insane amount of success and like they're never going to be that successful. But just like in Facebook, Instagram, where you see these like influencers that live this glorious life, I think the same is true for Twitter, where you see successful engineers at Google or like entrepreneurs making a ton of money, raising their Series A, crazy valuation. Those are definitely outliers, and not to like constantly compare yourself to people is, the age-old thing that's it's always going to let you down. And I think the number one thing that's always helped me with kind of getting beyond this imposter syndrome or believing you're not good enough or worthy, is really finding the people, which is kind of the hardest part, especially in entrepreneurial world, finding people that are going through what you're going through and like being open and honest and like sharing those experiences, kind of like what I'm doing now for everyone that sees this. Hopefully it helps in some way that like, you maybe see me as like technical co-founder who's built a great product, but going through so many hurdles to get there is like a total normal, very normal part of the journey. So it's like, enjoy the journey. It's not all gonna be bad if you push through it and you believe that you can do anything. It turns out like that's probably true. You can't do anything.
In my younger days, I was very cynical and avoided such sentimental like statements. But I think we need a little bit of that now, and I definitely appreciate the sort of optimism, but that comes from validated experiences like your own. Carter, we've really come to the end of all the questions that we wanted to explore. So
Great.
I'd love to give you an opportunity to do really what is a shameless plug. We do this for all our guests as a thank you. Feel free to talk about whatever you like. The floor is yours.
Sure. Yeah, my company PaperStreet, which we kind of briefly touched on, we now do investor reporting for early stage startups. So if you have a startup and you want to write better investor updates to engage your network, to find new investors, we have a product that is essentially Substack meets LinkedIn, where investors can find you. You can eventually find them. And for investors, we have a portfolio manager admin where you can kind of keep tabs on your entire portfolio of companies. If you're interested to learn more, paperstreet.vc is the URL.
Fantastic. Carter Lathrop, thank you so much for being on our show today. And I want to thank everybody for watching or listening this episode of Educative Sessions. You can check out more of our episodes at YouTube or on our Podbean account or pretty much every major podcasting platform out there. And lastly, if you want to learn more about Educative, just come check us out at educative.io. So for all of us here at Educative, thank you so much and happy learning. Appreciate you. Bye.
Bye.
Hope you enjoyed that. This episode is available on YouTube and also on many podcast platforms. If you'd like to be part of Educative Sessions, the form is open now to apply. You can also email me at lee@educative.io. Lastly, don't forget to like and comment this video and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more content. Thank you so much for watching and happy learning.